Hello, my name is Eric Rivers, 29 years old. I am a sergeant in the United States Army, currently stationed at U.S. Army Garrison Bavaria, Germany, a place where cold winds sweep through lush green fields and quaint villages nestle at the foot of the majestic Alps. Here the air always carries a sense of tranquility, as if time slows down compared to the bustling days I once lived in San Diego, California, my hometown, where golden sunlight stretches across the beaches and waves ceaselessly crash against the shore. I grew up in a family that everyone described as perfect. My father, Kenneth Rivers, is a stern man, always proud of the small family business he built. A workshop crafting handmade furniture, supplying luxurious hotels. My mother, Evelyn, is the kind of woman who is gentle yet sharp, always knowing how to keep the family's fire burning and ensuring everything in the household runs smoothly. Then there's Jordan, my younger brother, 5 years my junior, who is cherished by the family like a precious gem. Jordan is the only hope of the family, as my parents often say, especially after I chose to follow my own path. As a child, I was the center of attention. Being the eldest, my parents expected me to take over the family business, or at the very least, become a doctor or lawyer. Prestigious professions any parent would dream of for their child. I remember evenings at the dinner table, my father talking about the company's big orders, my mother excitedly discussing which college I'd attend and what I'd study. Their eyes sparkled when they looked at me as if I were their entire world. But everything changed the summer I turned 18, when I stood before my parents and told them I wanted to join the military. I still remember that day vividly. I had just graduated high school, sitting in the living room of our San Diego home, sunlight streaming through the large window, illuminating the leather sofa my father particularly loved. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding, and said, "I want to be a soldier. I want to serve in the military." The room fell silent. My father, holding a cup of coffee, slammed it down on the table, coffee splashing onto the glass surface. My mother stared at me, eyes wide, as if she couldn't believe her ears. "Eric, what are you saying?" she asked, her voice trembling. My father didn't say a word, just looked at me with eyes that felt like I had betrayed the entire family. From that day on, everything changed. I was no longer the beloved son. I became the failure in my parents' eyes, the one who rejected the dreams they had mapped out for me. My father called me selfish, saying I had thrown away the chance to bring honor to the family. My mother cried, asking why I chose such a dangerous and meaningless path. I tried to explain, but they wouldn't listen. They didn't want to understand that I wasn't doing this to defy them. I did it because I wanted to live true to myself, inspired by the stories of my grandfather Raymond, a quiet hero, a soldier, and the most influential figure in my life. Grandpa Raymond had the greatest impact on me. He was a soldier, though the family only knew he worked in logistics during wartime. He was reserved, always quiet, but whenever he spoke about his days in the military, his eyes lit up like an unquenchable flame. My grandmother passed away early when I was young, so he lived alone in a small wooden house on the outskirts of San Diego. I visited him often, especially on weekends. I loved sitting with him on his old armchair, listening to his stories about battles, camaraderie, and the meaning of honor and loyalty. He never boasted, but I could feel the strength in every word he spoke. He was the one who planted in me the dream of becoming a soldier. I remember those summer afternoons when the sun set in a fiery red glow behind the hills. Grandpa and I would sit on the porch eating cookies my mother made and drinking lemonade he prepared himself. He'd point to the sky and say, "Eric, you see, the world is vast. But what matters isn't how far you go, it's how you live." I didn't fully understand his words back then, but they etched themselves into my mind, like a guiding compass. But my parents couldn't see that. After I announced my decision to join the military, they nearly cut off contact with me. I still remember the last time I called home before heading to Germany. My mother answered, her voice cold. "If you've chosen that path, you're on your own." My father didn't even bother to talk. I stood at the airport, phone in hand, feeling like the world was crumbling beneath my feet. I didn't expect their support, but I had hoped they'd at least try to understand. Meanwhile, Jordan became the center of attention. My younger brother was always spoiled growing up. He's smart, lively, and knows how to please everyone. My parents poured all their expectations into Jordan after I didn't meet their hopes. They paid for him to attend a prestigious university, bought him a new car after high school graduation, and constantly praised him as the family's only hope. I don't blame Jordan. He's my brother and I love him. But sometimes seeing how my parents treat him, I can't help but feel like a shadow in my own family. The years in the military haven't been easy, but they've given me purpose. I started as a private, worked hard, learned, and gradually rose to the rank of sergeant. I now lead an infantry squad, and this job makes me feel like I belong somewhere, where I'm respected for what I do, not for what others expect of me. At the Bavaria base, I live in a completely different world, a world of discipline, camaraderie, and grueling challenges. Though I'm thousands of miles from home, I never forget my family. But in return, it seems my family doesn't want to acknowledge my existence. During holidays, I'm not invited home. My parents throw big parties inviting relatives and friends, but I only learn about them through the photos Jordan posts on social media. I stand on the sidelines of my own family's life like a stranger. I often call Grandpa, and he always answers with his warm voice. "How are you, Eric? How's the weather over there? Is training too tough?" he asks, and I know he's the only one who truly cares. In the military, I've learned to suppress my emotions and focus on the mission. But every night, lying on my bed in the small barracks room, I can't help but think about the old days. When my mother still held me close, when my father proudly patted my shoulder. I wonder, will there ever be a day when they look at me the way they used to? Will I ever feel like I belong to that family again? Those questions keep repeating, like the waves on San Diego's beaches crashing relentlessly into my heart. But I don't have time to dwell on them. Life at U.S. Army Garrison Bavaria is harsh and demands absolute focus. The infantry squad I lead, 12 soldiers, each with their own story, relies on me to guide them. I have to be strong, their anchor, even when I feel unsteady myself. In recent years, I've sent most of my salary back to my parents. It's not much, but it's enough to help them through the financial struggles of the family business. My father's furniture workshop isn't as prosperous as it once was. Big hotels have shifted to ordering from mass production corporations, and my father's small workshop struggles to compete. I learned this through rare calls with Grandpa Raymond, who always updates me on the family's situation, though he never directly says my parents need money. I send the money to my mother's bank account without a note, without expecting thanks. I only hope quietly that they'll understand I still care, even though they've pushed me away. Some of that money I know goes toward Jordan's tuition. My brother is in his final year at a prestigious university studying finance, the path my parents always dreamed of. I don't blame Jordan. He's young, still finding his place. But sometimes when I look at my empty bank account after each transfer, I can't help but wonder, does anyone in the family know what I've sacrificed? Do they ever think of me not as a failure, but as a son, a brother trying to do the right thing? I don't ask for repayment. I don't need thank you letters or sweet phone calls. But deep down, I long to be seen. Just once, I want my father to look me in the eyes and say, "Eric, I'm proud of you." I want my mother to hug me like she did when I was a boy, when I fell off my bike and she wiped away my tears. But those moments seem to belong to a distant past, buried under the dust of years apart. Grandpa regularly sends me handwritten letters. Each time I receive one, a warmth creeps into my heart. He writes in his shaky but heartfelt script, telling me about fishing trips at the lake near his house, fixing the wooden fence, or simply the San Diego weather. At the end of every letter, he always writes, "You're my pride, Eric." Never forget that. Those words keep me standing like a lighthouse, guiding me through dark days. Time passes and I've grown accustomed to life away from my family. I've built another family here in the military. Brothers who'd go through hell with me, who never ask about my past but are always ready to have my back. I've started to think maybe this is where I truly belong. Maybe I don't need to keep trying to win back my parents' love. Maybe I'm strong enough to move forward without their validation. Then one day the invitation came. I was in the small office at the barracks reviewing the squad's training schedule when my phone buzzed. A text from my mother, short and cold. "Family reunion this year in Oregon. Do you want to come?" I read and reread those words, my heart pounding. The family reunion. A gathering every 5 years where the entire Rivers clan comes together, eating, laughing, and sharing old stories. The last time I attended, I was 18, just before announcing my decision to join the military. That was the last time I felt truly part of the family. I held the phone, my fingers hovering over the screen, unsure how to respond. The invitation didn't feel like a real one. It felt like a formality, as if my mother sent it out of obligation. "No, how are you? No, I can't wait to see you." Just a dry, emotionless question. But despite that, a part of me sparked with hope. Maybe this was my chance to return, to mend the cracks, to show them I'm still Eric, the son, the brother they once loved. I replied, "I'll be there." Just 3 words, but it took me hours to type them. I didn't know what I expected, a warm response or at least an acknowledgement. But nothing came. The phone screen stayed silent, just like my family had been for years. I requested leave. No easy feat as a sergeant leading a squad. I had to rearrange training schedules, find a replacement, and complete a mountain of paperwork. But I did it all with a determination I didn't fully understand. Maybe I was tired of living like a shadow. Maybe I wanted to believe that my family, no matter how cold, still had a small place for me. The flight from Germany to Oregon took nearly 18 hours with 2 layovers. I sat on the plane, looking out the small window at the white clouds drifting below. I thought about what awaited me. I imagined the family gathered by the lake, a campfire flickering, laughter echoing. I pictured myself walking in, my mother running to hug me, my father patting my shoulder, and Jordan flashing his mischievous grin like old times. But then I reminded myself, don't hope too much. The greater the hope, the deeper the pain. When the plane landed in Portland, a surge of adrenaline coursed through me. I rented a car and drove to the lakeside lodge where my family had reserved a spot for the reunion. The road wound through pine forests, the scent of sap lingering in the air. I rolled down the window, letting the cool breeze in, trying to ease the nervous tightness in my chest. I didn't know what I'd face, but I knew I couldn't turn back. When I arrived, the sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the calm lake. The wooden lodges were scattered among the trees with red roofs and smoke rising from chimneys. I saw familiar cars parked in the lot. My Aunt Susan's, my Uncle Paul's, and the SUV my father bought Jordan after high school graduation. I took a deep breath, turned off the engine, and stepped out. No one came to greet me. No one knew I'd arrived, or perhaps no one cared. I stood there for a moment, gripping the strap of my backpack tightly, trying to steady myself. I had imagined this moment hundreds of times during the long flight from Germany. My mother running to hug me, my father patting my shoulder, or at the very least, a smile from Jordan. But reality was far harsher. I was just a shadow on the sidelines, a stranger in my own family. I walked into the main lodge where the lively chatter and laughter rang out like a symphony I wasn't part of. My mother was standing by a long dining table, arranging colorful dishes of mashed potatoes, roasted chicken, and the cornbread she always took pride in. My father was in the corner holding a glass of wine, animatedly discussing business with Uncle Paul. Jordan, my brother, was across the room, beaming with a girl I'd never seen before. She had glossy blonde hair and wore a pale blue dress. Probably Jordan's girlfriend, I thought, a small pang of jealousy creeping in, though I tried to push it away. I stood at the threshold, hesitating. No one noticed me except for Grandpa Raymond. He sat in the corner holding a glass of lemonade, his eyes thoughtful as if seeing through the crowd. When his gaze met mine, his face lit up, a slow smile spreading like sunlight on a winter day. "Eric," he called, his voice low but warm, cutting through the noise. "You're here." I walked over to him, feeling like I'd found an anchor in a storm. "I'm here, Grandpa," I said, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. He patted the wooden chair beside him, motioning for me to sit. I set my backpack on the floor and sat next to him, and in that moment I felt I wasn't entirely invisible. Grandpa was the only one who truly saw me. "How are you doing?" he asked, his eyes sharp but kind. I nodded, forcing a small smile. "I'm fine, Grandpa. Just a bit tired from the flight." He nodded, saying nothing more, but I knew he understood. He always did, even the things I couldn't put into words. I looked around the room, trying to blend into the atmosphere. But then I realized something heartbreaking. No one had prepared for my arrival. When I asked my mother about sleeping arrangements, she hesitated, then said with an apologetic tone, "Oh, Eric, I didn't think you'd come. All the rooms are taken." I stood frozen, feeling like I'd been slapped. Taken? I had flown 18 hours, crossed half the globe to be here, and they hadn't even saved me a corner of a bed? Grandpa, still sitting beside me, spoke up before I could respond. "Eric will stay in my room," he said firmly. My mother looked at him, then nodded quickly, as if relieved to escape an awkward situation. "All right, Dad," she said, then turned back to her tasks. I looked at Grandpa, wanting to thank him, but he just shook his head slightly, as if to say, "No need." Grandpa's room was at the end of the lodge, small but cozy, with a single bed, an old wooden table, and a window overlooking the lake. I set my backpack down and sat on the bed, feeling like I'd returned to a safe haven. Grandpa sat in the chair across from me, starting to talk about his recent days, about the big fish he caught, how he fixed a leaky porch roof. I listened, letting his voice soothe the wounds in my heart. We talked late into the night, like two old soldiers sharing battlefield stories. He didn't ask about the family or my parents, and I knew he was deliberately avoiding the topic to spare me pain. That night, I lay on the fold-out bed the lodge staff brought in, listening to Grandpa's steady breathing. I thought about the years gone by, about how my family once meant everything to me, and how I'd lost that because of one choice. I wondered if I'd been wrong, if I should have given up the military to please my parents. But then I remembered Grandpa's eyes, his words about honor and loyalty. No, I wasn't wrong. I was just living true to myself. The next morning, the main event of the family reunion began. The lodge was decorated vibrantly with twinkling string lights hung on trees and a large banquet table set up outdoors by the lake. Everyone gathered, eating, laughing, and chatting. I tried to blend in, talking to Aunt Susan and my cousin Mark, but every time I spoke, I sensed their awkwardness. They asked polite questions. "How's life in Germany? Is the military tough?" But quickly moved on to other topics, usually about Jordan. Jordan, as always, was the center of attention. He showed up with the blonde girl, introduced to me as Madeline Bishop, his girlfriend. Madeline had a radiant smile, a gentle voice, and a charm that made everyone adore her. Aunt Susan couldn't stop gushing. "Jordan's so lucky to have such a wonderful girl." Uncle Paul clapped Jordan on the shoulder, saying loudly, "This kid's the pride of the whole clan." Everyone laughed, raised their glasses in a toast, and I sat there, quietly sipping my beer, feeling like I was watching a play I had no part in. My parents barely spoke to me. My mother was busy hosting, and my father only exchanged a few polite words when I initiated conversation. I tried not to care, but each word, each distracted glance from them felt like a knife to the heart. Then came the moment that shattered my world. Near the end of the party, my father stood, lightly tapping his wine glass to get everyone's attention. The room fell silent, all eyes on him. My mother stood beside him, smiling proudly. He cleared his throat, his voice ringing out in the cool evening air. "We're gathered today to celebrate the Rivers family, to reflect on memories and look forward to the future," he began. "And today, Evelyn and I want to announce something special. We've decided to pass down the family home, the place filled with our memories to Jordan as a reward for all his hard work. The room erupted in applause. Jordan stood grinning broadly, hugging my mother, then shaking my father's hand. Madeline sat beside him, her eyes sparkling with pride. Everyone began congratulating him, praising how deserving he was. I sat there, my beer cold in my hand, feeling like my entire body was freezing over. That house, the house in San Diego where I grew up, where I ran around the yard, where I sat for hours watching the rain through the window, now belonged to Jordan. No one mentioned me. No one mentioned the years I sent money to help the family. No one mentioned the sleepless nights in the barracks thinking of them. I was invisible, as if I'd never existed in the Rivers family. I looked at Grandpa, hoping for some comfort, but he just sat there, his eyes calm, his hands tightly gripping his lemonade glass. He said nothing, but I knew he was watching, waiting for something. I wanted to stand up, to shout, to ask my parents why they treated me this way. But I couldn't. I just sat there, bottling up every emotion, as I'd been trained to do in the military. I smiled, clapped along with everyone else, but inside a deep crack had formed. When the party ended, I stood and quietly left the table. No one noticed. I walked to the lake's edge, standing under the moonlight, watching the water shimmer. I thought about the years gone by, the sacrifices I'd made, and how my family chose to forget me. I wondered if I should stay, if I should keep trying to win their love. But then a voice in my head whispered, "You don't need to prove anything. Be yourself." I returned to Grandpa's room, my heart heavy. As I stepped inside, I saw he was already there, holding an old book, but his eyes weren't on the pages. He looked at me, his gaze sharp yet gentle, as if trying to read the words I couldn't say. I sat on the bed, my hands clasped tightly, attempting to hide the storm of emotions raging inside me. "You okay, Eric?" he asked, his voice steady and calm, the way it always was when he wanted me to open up. I wanted to say I was fine, that I was used to being invisible to my family. But my throat tightened, and I only managed a nod, forcing a weak smile. He didn't press further, just set the book down and stood. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow's a long day." I lay on the fold-out bed, listening to the wind blowing through the window, carrying the chill from the lake. The next morning I woke early, as is a soldier's habit. Grandpa was up even earlier, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, gazing at the lake shimmering under the dawn light. I sat beside him, saying nothing, just quietly savoring the rare moment of peace. "Ever thought about leaving the military?" he asked suddenly. I froze, caught off guard by a question I'd always avoided. I'm not sure, Grandpa," I replied. "The Army's where I feel I belong, but sometimes I wonder if I'm running from something." He nodded, not judging, not advising. "Life's a battle," he said, "but not every battle needs guns and bullets. Some battles you fight within yourself." I didn't fully grasp his meaning, but his words gave me a new sense of strength, as if he was preparing me for something greater. By noon, everyone gathered again in the main lodge to continue the reunion festivities after 5 years apart. I tried to avoid my parents' gazes, the stories about Jordan and Madeline, and the pitying looks from relatives. I just wanted to stay near Grandpa, the only one who made me feel seen. But as the afternoon party began, I realized I couldn't hide forever. My parents stood up again, going on about Jordan's successes, his recent promotion, his and Madeline's future plans. Everyone listened, nodded, and I sat there, silent as a shadow. I decided to leave. I couldn't take it anymore, not out of jealousy, but because of the feeling of being erased from my own family. I stood, quietly packed my things in Grandpa's room. I didn't want to make a scene or draw attention. I just wanted to go, to return to Germany, to the place where I felt valued. I zipped up my backpack, slung it over my shoulder, and walked to the car. It was dark now, the lake reflecting the silvery moonlight. I opened the car door, tossed my backpack into the back seat, and slid into the driver's seat. I gripped the steering wheel, trying to suppress the lump in my throat. "I don't need them," I told myself. "I don't need anyone." But then a soft knock on the window startled me. I turned to see Grandpa standing there, his expression stern yet determined. "Eric," he said, his voice low but resolute, "don't go yet. I have something to say." I hesitated, unsure of what he wanted, but his eyes, the eyes of a soldier who'd faced countless battles, made it impossible to refuse. I stepped out of the car and followed him back to the main lodge. As we entered, the party was still in full swing. Laughter, clinking glasses, and lively chatter filled the air. Grandpa walked straight to the center of the room, picked up a glass and tapped it sharply, the sound cutting through the noise. All eyes turned to him. My parents looked at him in surprise. Jordan stopped mid-sentence, and Madeline tilted her head curiously. I stood behind him, my heart pounding, unsure of what he was about to do. "I've stayed silent too long," Grandpa began, his voice clear and commanding, as if addressing an army rather than a room of relatives. "But today I can't keep watching injustice unfold in our own family." The room fell silent. My father furrowed his brow. My mother looked confused. A jolt ran through me. I had no idea where he was taking this. Grandpa scanned the room, his sharp gaze sweeping over everyone, then settling on my parents. "I've lived long enough to see this family grow, and I thought I'd done my duty as a father and grandfather. But today I realize I was wrong." He paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "Everyone here knows I was a soldier, but no one knows the truth about what I did." He looked straight at my father, his eyes unwavering. "I wasn't a logistics worker like you all thought. I was Special Forces serving in a covert U.S. unit. I fought in missions you can't even imagine, and I survived, not because of luck, but because I knew what honor and sacrifice meant." The room seemed to hold its breath. I stared at Grandpa, stunned. Special Forces? He'd never mentioned this. In all his stories, he only talked about driving supply trucks through war zones. But now, looking into his eyes, I knew he was telling the truth. And I knew he wasn't done. "In those years," he continued, "I amassed a fortune from bonuses from quiet investments. About $10 million. A murmur rippled through the room. Aunt Susan covered her mouth, Uncle Paul's eyes widened, and Jordan stared at Grandpa as if he'd said something unbelievable. My father stood abruptly, his voice trembling. "Dad, what are you talking about?" Grandpa raised a hand, silencing him. "I had planned to leave that fortune to you, Kenneth," he said, looking directly at my father. "But today I've changed my mind." He turned to me, his gaze softening but still resolute. "I've decided to leave it all to Eric, the only one in this family who understands what honor, sacrifice, and loyalty truly mean." The room fell into a suffocating silence, as if someone had hit pause on the world. All eyes turned to me, but I just stood there, my heart pounding, my mind reeling. $10 million. For me? The number was beyond anything I'd ever imagined, but more than that, Grandpa's words. The recognition he gave me felt like a fire warming my frozen heart after all these years. I wanted to say something, to thank him, to shout that I didn't need the money, only for my family to see me as they once did. But my throat tightened, and I stood frozen like a soldier awaiting orders. Then Uncle Paul's soft chuckle broke the silence. "Raymond, are you drunk?" he said, half joking, half serious, as if trying to lighten the mood. $10 million? For Eric? You're kidding, right? A few other relatives joined in with awkward laughter. Aunt Susan chimed in, her voice feigning cheerfulness. "Raymond, you must have had too much wine." Some people nearby nodded, as if they thought Grandpa was just rambling, an old man trying to stir attention. I looked at Grandpa, worried the mockery would hurt him. But he stood there, steady as a mountain, his sharp gaze sweeping over the room. He said nothing, only calmly pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and placed it on the table. "If you think I'm talking nonsense," he said, his voice low but sharp as a blade, "just wait a few minutes." The room went quiet as the door swung open. A middle-aged man stepped in, dressed in a black suit carrying a leather briefcase. His stride confident yet understated. "My name is Clifford Hale, attorney for Mr. Raymond Rivers," he introduced himself, his voice calm and authoritative. He set the briefcase on the table, opened it, and pulled out a thick stack of documents. I'm here to confirm that what Mr. Raymond just announced is true. His estate, including cash, real estate, and investments, totals approximately $10 million. Mr. Raymond had originally intended to leave this to his son. But yesterday he called me and instructed that the entire $10 million be transferred to Eric Rivers, his grandson. All legal proceedings will be finalized tomorrow. The atmosphere in the banquet hall froze. The mocking laughter from moments ago died out, replaced by stunned expressions and gaping mouths. Uncle Paul sank back into his chair, his wine glass trembling in his hand. Aunt Susan covered her mouth, eyes wide, as if she couldn't believe her ears. I looked around, seeing the familiar faces of relatives. Those who had praised Jordan ignored me for years, now lowering their heads as if ashamed of what they'd said earlier. My father was the first to erupt. He shot to his feet, the wooden chair creaking, his face red with fury. Dad, what are you doing? You can't treat me like this. I'm your son, the one who's held this family together, who's sacrificed my whole life to take care of you. And Eric? He pointed at me, his eyes burning. He left, chose that pointless soldier's life, made his mother cry for nights on end. And now you say he's more deserving than me? You're unfair to your own flesh and blood. His words cut into my heart like a knife. Pointless soldier's life? The years I poured sweat, blood, and tears into the military, the nights I stayed awake to keep my squad safe, the times I sent money home to help the family, all pointless in his eyes? I clenched my fists, trying to suppress the anger rising in my chest. I wanted to shout back, to tell him I'd sacrificed more than anyone in this room knew. But I couldn't. I was trained to stay calm, to not let emotions take over. And I knew if I spoke now, things would only get worse. My mother stood, trying to defuse the situation. She stepped toward Grandpa, placing a hand on his shoulder, her voice sweet but trembling. Dad, I know you love Eric, she said, her eyes glistening with tears. We do too, but $10 million? That's the family's legacy. Jordan's about to graduate and start his career. He needs this support to build his future. Eric has his own life in Germany, doesn't he? She turned to me, her eyes pleading for me to agree, as if my nod could make Grandpa change his mind. But her words only deepened my pain. They didn't just want Grandpa's fortune. They wanted to erase me from the family picture, as if I'd never existed. I looked at Jordan. My brother stood frozen, gripping his wine glass so tightly his knuckles were white. Madeline, his girlfriend, sat beside him, eyes wide with shock. She took his hand, whispering something, but he just shook his head, his gaze flickering between Grandpa and me. Grandpa, Jordan finally spoke, his voice soft and trembling. I don't understand. What did I do wrong? His eyes were red, and for the first time I saw him not as the family's only hope, but as a young man trying to please everyone. I wanted to tell him I didn't want the money, that I wasn't here to compete. But before I could speak, Grandpa's voice cut through again. Enough, he said, his tone low but sharp as a blade. I'm not here to argue. I've made my decision and it's final. He looked straight at my father, his eyes unwavering. Kenneth, you say Eric abandoned you, but have you ever asked what he's sacrificed? Do you know he's been sending money home for years? To save your business, to pay for Jordan's tuition? And you've never once thanked him. Do you know he's lived years of sacrifice, hoping just once for this family to acknowledge him? He paused, turning to the room. All of you here, have you ever truly seen Eric? Or have you only seen him as a failure because he didn't follow the path you wanted? Grandpa's words were like a bomb exploding in the room. No one dared meet his gaze, not even my father. Aunt Susan bowed her head, her face flushed, as if ashamed of her earlier comments about Jordan. Uncle Paul shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding Grandpa's eyes. My mother sank into her chair, covering her face, tears streaming down. My father stood there, mouth agape, unable to speak. Jordan looked at me, his expression complex, part anger, part shame, and a lot of confusion. Eric, he whispered, barely audible. I didn't know. I stood there, stunned. I didn't know what to say or do. I just looked at Grandpa, my eyes filled with gratitude. He had seen me, truly seen me, when the world turned its back. He stepped closer, placed a hand on my shoulder, and said softly, "Just for me to hear. You don't need to say anything. Just live up to it." His words ignited a fire in my heart. I nodded, my eyes stinging, avoiding his gaze for fear I'd break down. The room remained silent, as if waiting for something, a protest, an explanation, or just a sigh to break the heavy atmosphere. But no one spoke. My father turned and stormed out, the door slamming behind him. My mother ran after him, her voice choked with sobs, calling his name. Jordan and Madeline quietly left, not looking at me. Relatives began to disperse, some whispering, others glancing at me with unreadable expressions, as if I'd become a stranger in their eyes. I stood there beside Grandpa, feeling like the world had shifted. I didn't want the money, not because I didn't need it, but because I feared it would drive me further from my family. But I knew Grandpa didn't do this for the money. He did it to tell the world I was worthy. And for the first time in years, I felt I was no longer a shadow. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the lodge's porch, gazing at the lake shimmering under the moonlight, trying to sort through the chaos in my mind. Grandpa's words, my father's anger, Jordan's confused look, and my mother's trembling voice swirled in my head like a storm. I thought about the years I'd spent trying to earn my family's recognition, the times I sent money home without a single thank you, the way they gave my childhood home to Jordan without mentioning me. And now Grandpa had stood up for me, but the cost was a deeper rift in the family. The next morning, Grandpa and I woke early, as is the habit of 2 generations of soldiers. "What are you going to do next?" he asked, his voice steady but not pressing. I hesitated, unsure how to answer. I don't know, Grandpa, I said. I never thought about having that kind of money. I just want to go back to Germany, keep doing my job. He nodded, his gaze distant, as if recalling old days. "Money doesn't make the man, Eric," he said, "but it can give you a chance to live true to your heart. Don't let it define you. Use it to do something meaningful." I nodded, but my heart was still in turmoil. Meaningful? I'd lived for honor, for loyalty, but I didn't know if I could find meaning in a family that had turned its back on me. We left the lodge early that day. I drove Grandpa back to his small wooden house in San Diego, the long road quiet except for the hum of old country songs on the radio. He didn't say much, but when he spoke, his words carried a weight that made me reflect. "Family isn't always the ones you share blood with," he said as we stopped at a gas station. "Sometimes family is the ones who see you, truly see you." I looked at him, wanting to ask if he regretted confronting my parents and the family, but I didn't dare. I just nodded, feeling like he was giving me a lesson I wasn't yet ready to fully grasp. When we reached his house, I helped him carry his luggage inside. The house was the same as ever, the smell of old wood, the worn armchair, the family photos on the wall, including one of Jordan and me as kids grinning ear to ear beside Grandpa. I stared at the photo, my heart heavy. "Do you think they'll ever forgive me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Grandpa looked at me, his eyes gentle but firm. "Forgiveness is their business, Eric," he said. "But you don't need their forgiveness to live well. You just need to live true." I nodded, but deep down I knew I still longed for the day my family would see me the way Grandpa did. I stayed in San Diego for one more day before my flight back to Germany. No one from the family called or texted. Right before I left for the airport, Grandpa called, his voice low but vibrant. "Kenneth and Evelyn are pestering me," he said, chuckling softly. "They've been calling all day trying to change my mind. But I've made my decision, and Clifford's handling the paperwork. You just focus on your work." I smiled, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. "Thank you, Grandpa," I said, and this time I truly wanted him to hear the gratitude in my voice. The flight back to Germany was long and exhausting. I sat by the window watching clouds drift below and thought about the past. I remembered evenings when my mother held me close, telling fairy tales. I remembered my father patting my shoulder, proudly bragging to neighbors about his big boy. I remembered days when Jordan and I ran around the yard pretending to be superheroes, laughing until our sides hurt. Those memories were beautiful but sharp, like shards of broken glass piercing my heart. When the plane landed in Munich, I felt a familiar surge of adrenaline. I returned to Bavaria base where everything was orderly, where I knew I belonged. I didn't rest or tell my squad about what happened in Oregon. I just quietly resumed my duties, checking training schedules, leading drills, ensuring everything ran smoothly. But inside, I knew I'd changed. Grandpa's words, his recognition, had planted a new seed in me. Not about money, but about who I could be, what I could do. In the weeks that followed, I received a few messages from Grandpa. He told me my parents kept calling, trying to persuade him to change his will. He said they even came to his house with Jordan, but he stood firm. "They don't understand, Eric," he wrote in one message. "But I believe you will. Live up to it. That's all I want." I read and reread that message, feeling like he was right beside me, reminding me of my purpose. I started thinking about the future. I loved the Army, but I knew I couldn't be a soldier forever. The idea of leaving the military, of using Grandpa's money to do something meaningful, began to take root. I wasn't sure what it would be, but I wanted it to be something that would make Grandpa proud, something that proved I was worthy of his faith. Months passed, and I grew accustomed to the idea that my family, except for Grandpa, might never truly accept me. My parents didn't call or text. Jordan sent me a short message. "I'm sorry for being oblivious, for not knowing how much you've sacrificed." I replied, "It's okay, Jordan. I'm fine. Thanks." I started making plans. I contacted Clifford Hale, Grandpa's lawyer, to learn more about the estate. He explained that everything was set to transfer to me upon Grandpa's passing. But he also said Grandpa wanted me to start using part of the money now, to build something of my own. I thought about what Grandpa had said, about living true to my heart. And then, an idea began to form. A survival skills training center for teenagers, especially those who were abandoned or came from troubled families. I wanted those kids to feel that, even if the world turned its back on them, there was always a place where they belonged. 3 years later, I officially left the military after completing my service. It wasn't an easy decision. The Army had been my home, the place where I found myself when my family pushed me to the sidelines. But I knew I couldn't be a soldier forever. It was time to build something lasting, a legacy of my own, not just for me, but for those who needed it most. I returned to San Diego, to Grandpa Raymond's small wooden house where childhood memories remained vivid, like the smell of old wood and the crackle of the fireplace on winter nights. I arrived in San Diego on an autumn day when the sky was a deep blue and the air carried the salty scent of the sea. Grandpa met me at the airport, his smile as warm as California sunshine. "You've gotten thinner," he said, patting my shoulder. "Didn't the Army feed you well?" I laughed, hugging him, feeling the steadfastness of the old soldier. "I'm fine, Grandpa," I said, "and now I'm back here to be close to you." I moved in with Grandpa in his small wooden house on the outskirts of San Diego. The house was unchanged, the smell of old wood, the worn armchair, the family photos on the wall. I slept in my old room, the one that had been my world as a child. Each morning I woke early, made coffee for Grandpa, and we sat on the porch watching the sunrise. He told me about his days in combat, about comrades who didn't make it, and about how he learned that life isn't about what you own but what you leave behind. I listened, soaking in every word as if he were handing me a precious book. With Clifford's help, I began searching for land to build the training center. After a few months, I found a small ranch about an hour's drive from Grandpa's house, nestled among green hills and a small stream. It wasn't large, but it was enough to start. A main wooden house, a few storage sheds, and open land for outdoor training. I used a small portion of Grandpa's fortune to buy the ranch and began renovating it. I hired workers to convert the stables into classrooms, set up tents for group activities, and designed a survival training area with obstacles, ropes, and trails. I named the center Beacon, inspired by Grandpa's words about guiding others. My goal was to help teenagers, especially those abandoned or from broken families, learn confidence, resilience, and purpose. I applied lessons from the military, discipline, teamwork, and overcoming challenges, combined with the values Grandpa taught me: honor, loyalty, and kindness. I didn't want the center to just teach skills. I wanted it to be a home where kids felt seen and valued. That summer, Beacon officially opened. The first group consisted of 15 kids ages 12 to 17 from social service programs and struggling families. I remember the first day when they stepped off an old bus, their eyes filled with suspicion and shyness. One boy, Miguel, stood in a corner, hands in his pockets, eyeing me like I was a strict officer. "You gonna make us run laps or something?" he asked, his tone defiant. I smiled, shaking my head. "No, Miguel. I just want to teach you how to get back up when you fall." I started with simple lessons: how to pitch a tent, start a fire, read a map. But more than that, I taught them to believe in themselves. I shared stories from my military days about feeling like I didn't belong and how Grandpa helped me find my path. The kids listened, hesitant at first, but slowly they opened up. I saw them laugh more, work together, and start believing they could achieve something greater. Grandpa visited Beacon often. He'd sit in a folding chair watching the kids run through obstacle courses, his eyes sparkling like a young soldier's. "You're doing good work, Eric," he said once, as we sat by the stream watching the kids set up tents. "But you know what I want next?" He raised an eyebrow, a mischievous smile on his face. "A granddaughter-in-law? You're almost 30. Don't make me wait too long." I laughed, but I knew he was serious. Grandpa always urged me to find a partner, to marry, to build a family of my own. "I'm not ready, Grandpa," I said, but he just shook his head. "You don't need to be ready. Just open your heart." I nodded, but I knew I still carried old wounds, from my family, from years of being invisible. I wasn't sure I could open up to someone, not when I still feared rejection. Those days with Grandpa were the warmest of my life. We fixed fences together, union fished by the ranch's stream, and sat on the porch at night talking about everything from his battles to my dreams. He told me about Grandma, how she'd been the light of his life, and how he learned that love was the only thing worth living for. "Don't let the past trap you, Eric," he said one night under the moonlight. "Your family may have hurt you, but you can choose to live differently." But that happiness didn't last forever. 2 years after I returned to San Diego, Grandpa began to weaken. He coughed more, moved slower, and some days he just sat on the porch staring into the distance. I knew his time was short, but I didn't want to believe it. I tried to spend every moment with him, cherishing every smile, every word. One morning I found him in his armchair, peaceful as if asleep. He was gone, without pain or fear, just as he'd lived, with the calm and resolve of a soldier. I held his funeral on a clear day at the military cemetery where he'd wanted to rest. It was simple but dignified as he wished. Old soldiers, his wartime comrades, came to pay respects, wearing their caps and sharing stories of his quiet heroism. They called him a silent hero, and I knew they spoke the truth. My parents and Jordan attended, sitting in the back, silent. My mother looked at me with guilt in her eyes. My father kept his head down, and Jordan gave a slight nod when our eyes met. I didn't blame them. I'd learned to forgive, but I couldn't forget the years they'd pushed me away. When everyone left, I stood by Grandpa's grave, looking at the headstone. Raymond Rivers, soldier, father, grandfather. I whispered, "I'll live up to it, Grandpa." And I knew, though he was gone, he'd always guide me as he had for years. After the funeral, I returned to Beacon with renewed determination. I expanded the center, took in more kids, and partnered with local organizations to support struggling families. Each day I watched the kids tackle obstacles, laugh by campfires, and share their stories. I saw myself in them, kids who once thought they weren't enough, who felt they didn't belong. And I knew this was the legacy Grandpa wanted me to leave. One late afternoon, I stood by the ranch's field watching the kids train under the golden sunlight. A gentle breeze carried the scent of dry grass and the sound of laughter. I thought about my journey, from a boy craving his family's love to a soldier finding purpose in the army to a teacher and guide. I thought about Grandpa's lessons, that honor isn't about what others think of you but how you live, that loyalty is not just to others but to yourself, and that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting but choosing to live free of the past. If I could tell the kids or anyone listening one thing, it would be, don't let anyone tell you you're not enough. You don't need the world's approval to live true. All it takes is one person to believe in you, and most importantly, you must believe in yourself. Live worthy not to prove anything but to be the best version of you. I looked to the horizon where the sun was setting and smiled. I knew Grandpa was somewhere watching me, and I hoped he was proud.